Well, hello everybody, this is Craig from the Pacific War Channel, the channel where we cover the entire history of the Asia-Pacific War from 1937 all the way to 1945, and all the major events that led up to it. Joined here yet again by my co-host, Gaurav. How are you?
Hey Greg, wonderful to be back again. Looking forward to another really productive discussion about the North Africa campaign.
Yeah. And this is going to be the longest episode to date, that's for sure. Just looking over the notes that we've both put up for this one. This episode is going to be overall about what is known as Operation Crusader. Now, as I keep saying in all these episodes, this is a series. You don't necessarily have to watch the previous episodes. They're kind of standalone in their own way, but to catch you up to speed. Hey everyone, I just wanted to let you know I now have a Patreon account found at www.patreon.com/thepacificwarchannel. Over there you can find exclusive Patreon episodes and podcasts based on suggestions from patrons, and other benefits like early access to all of my content, live hangouts, your name in the end credits, and much, much more. So please go check it out. Mussolini made a horrible blunder. He tried to invade Egypt. It failed tremendously. So much so, the British actually chased the Italians all the way across North Africa. And some
With
other
a
event,
much smaller force, a significantly
like
smaller
a fourth
force.
of the force, yeah. Taking like 4 times the amount of prisoners at the same time. It's very impressive. But they ruffled a bunch of feathers, and some other stuff was going on in the world, like in Greece, for example. And Hitler freaked out, and he had to unleash General Rommel with the famous Africa Corps to North Africa. And the last time we were speaking about how Rommel basically chased the British more or less all the way back to Egypt, and
Yeah.
in a pretty extravagant way. So, the British have already made some attempts at some counteroffensives, but Operation Crusader, what we're going to be talking about today, is kind of the first. I would call it the first big counteroffensive. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. And I think it's also quite noticed, like we should also call this out, right? While it is going to be like one of the biggest operations, this is also going to be the first operation where the British not have had a drastic change of command as well.
True.
We are the entire area is now being led by a new general. The air forces have got new men at the front. So this is going to be a bit of a, it's like, they're proving grounds, right? They're baptism by fire, for lack of a better term.
Yep. And again, I'd already caught everyone up to speed, but again, just the context of North Africa, as we've said almost in every episode, it's an absolutely enormous trek from one side to the other, requiring about 50% of your fuel if you're trucking stuff being used to go over. And just to give an example, so Benghazi, which is like the closest large depot for the Axis at this point, to go to Alexandria is 1,800 kilometers. It's a pretty far distance, and I speak about this right now, writing a script about what if the Japanese attacked the Soviet Union in Siberia, and we're looking at considerable numbers as well there. It's just lunacy, but I have to make that show. And now we're in a situation where both sides are building up. So the Axis, they at this point, we're looking at them having about 7 divisions, including air and naval units. They have about 70 tons of supplies required to function per month, which really is going to be what it's going to be the thing that hampers Rommel. It's not so much that he doesn't have the units, not so much he doesn't have the technology, it's that he doesn't have the fuel, doesn't have the water, and there's no means of really having an adequate supply line that is consistent. That's a good way to put it. If the Axis,
Yeah,
yeah, if their
I
convoys
think,
reached North Africa, it would have been better. Yeah.
yeah, true. But that's what I was, alluding to. I think they needed at his current strength with both, the Italians and the German forces, his panzer armies needed overall about 70,000 tons of supplies. Now, the supplies that would be coming in per month, and this will be supplies coming in at the port, right? So this is your fuel, it'll be ammo, it'll be medical supplies, it'll be new guns, new tanks, uniforms, food, water. But the thing is, as you rightly said, like just a couple of minutes ago, just trucking it to his front lines, around half of the fuel is gone,
Yeah,
right? Just to
so
keep the subs.
yeah,
And this actually is a situation where, as I mentioned in the previous episode, because Flieger Corps 10 of the Luftwaffe was stationed in Sicily, it gave Malta a brutal,
oh yeah.
hammering. Okay. So I think in that time, like, the RAF and was barely able to do any damage to any Axis convoys. So I think they were like getting like 95% of all supplies through in a 4 month period. Okay, which is intense, right? Because that means the offensive will continue. That's why, Operation Sonnenblume, coupled with the withdrawal of the Allied forces from Egypt to go towards Greece, obviously we saw like, huge reversal of fortunes.
It actually
But
makes it
now,
look a lot more devastating than it is because, again, it's an extravagant offensive by the Germans, but like you had just said, it was the British intentionally withdrawing as well from multiple significant locations. So it
Mhm.
really, on paper, if you were someone like Churchill and Hitler playing a little game here, it looks like it's devastating, but they haven't fought real battles until they get to like the borders. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah. So the thing is, as we ended the previous episode in about June 1941.
Mhm.
But that is a very important month because that is the time Operation Barbarossa starts, which
Oh
is
yeah.
the only reason why the Germans had taken an interest in, like, Sicily and the Balkans, because not only were the Italians like, ruining the name of the Axis in Hitler's view, but he also wanted to secure the oil fields because that was going to be the only major fuel source of Germany in this war,
Oh yeah.
the Romanian oil fields. So the thing is, now Malta gets a break because, but like I think towards the end of May, the Axis forces, even Flieger Corps 10 starts to pack up and head towards the Eastern Front, right?
Yeah,
Because
most
it's
of
all
them
hands on deck.
they leave a
It's
commander and a few troops, but it's going to be the Italians for quite a few months. They're going to have to go back to being the only ones raiding. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is also significant because at the same time, Malta gets a new Air Force commander. Air Vice Marshal Foster Maynard is replaced by Air Commodore Hugh Lloyd. Okay, so Lloyd comes and, and this is a guy who will later become, Air Chief Marshal,
Yes.
so, and so he comes in, and the battery the Germans have given to Malta cannot even be understated because I think they had, 60 aircraft of all types. So this is like your bombers, torpedo bombers, recon aircraft, and fighters. And they're barely having spares, fuel, and it is crazy that they don't even have like, hammers and wrenches to do basic repairs.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know how they kind of scraped anything together. But that was a situation for, Malta. But, you know, at least with this guy, he has an aggressive way of thinking. So, they obviously, and at least this time he at least disperses the squadrons across the island so that they're not an easy target of just being lined up next to each other.
Yeah.
So, now, like, and also, he started to reorganize the island's defenses, right? Like strategically positioning guns. It was even said, like, the main aircraft engine repair facility was quite exposed right next to a beach. All you needed is just a few bombs, and then your planes are not going to be serviced. But,
Yeah.
you know, what he managed to do, right, is, not only him, like obviously he starts organizing these guys to become a better effective force. The British are able to put in two major convoys in the next few months to Malta. So you have this operate like so James Somerville. I think he would be involved in the Pacific War as well, right?
Yes, he will be.
Yeah, so he led a force in July 1941, where from Gibraltar you had a big convoy which is escorted by one battleship and a battle cruiser, four cruisers, 18 destroyers, 13 merchantmen, And at the cost of, like, one destroyer sunk and six aircraft, they land about 65,000 tons of supplies on the island, which is huge. And then even in September, there was this Operation Halberd, which, we see a even larger convoy come in, and this is now dropping about 85 to 90,000 tons of supplies. And one credit to Malta, except for, like, ammunition and fuel, right, which are going to be consumed quite heavily in, wartime scenario. They actually did have a good amount of, you know, supplies for the civilian and military to function as well, like with a reserve of 8 to 15 months. So this is a really good period for the allies. And at the same time, now the allies are getting better. Well, I call them the British now because unfortunately that's the reality right now. They do get better aircraft. Earlier they were just having a few like gladiators. At least now they're having the Hurricanes that are forming the core fighter. So at least that's an upgrade. And they also start getting their first Blenheim and Bow fighter units. And I have to say, I'm a big fan of the Bow fighter. I don't know, I
Yes.
really love that aircraft.
Especially against convoys. It's gonna be
Yeah, it's
yeah.
it's quite a heavy aircraft and does its job well. But then again, I might be biased because I've read a lot of these Commander comics, and like they do really, like, the Bow fighter is like one of the most, like, in the few comics I remember was like, they really hyped it up, and it did look good in the drawing. So but it was a really good aircraft, and I mean, it had, and it was quite heavily armed, right? You had over 10 machine guns, and it would be carrying, like, bombs or torpedoes and 8 rockets. So this is really good against convoys, or it could also be in land support. But that's the thing for Malta. They've been reinforced, and as we've seen, right, the Italian Air Force has never been really much of a threat without the Germans leading the way. And we have Malta is now wrecking the uh access shipping that, I think it was said about 55 to 60% of the supplies intended for the Africa Corps was sunk in these from, I think after the withdrawal of Fleeger Corps 10 till at least October. 60% of their supplies. That is
Jeez.
gonna hamstrung them so badly,
And just, a
right?
reminder
And
to the audience, Rommel's sitting out there nearly 900 kilometers away from Benghazi. So every day that passes by, if these convoys aren't making it, it's almost game over because without the supplies, eventually he just has to make withdrawals because he can dig in as long as he wants, but the British are not they're
they're not
not
gonna
very
be idle at the
passive.
same time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole campaign,
And
they're never passive.
I think this is gonna be a really good example of how that, like, bad, like, it was not only the Royal Air Force that was doing this beating, okay? Even the Royal Navy was also
Yeah.
butchering. Like, so there was this incident on, like, called the Battle of the Duisburg Convoy around the first half of November, 8th and 9th November. A British force, which is just two light cruisers and two destroyers, okay? They engage in a convoy that's fairly well escorted. That convoy has two heavy cruisers and 10 destroyers, taking, 7,000 seven merchant ships to, which is gonna go to Rommel. And it was a disaster for the Axis. All the merchant ships and a destroyer was sunk,
Oof.
and two other destroyers were damaged at the cost of one British destroyer being damaged. Considering they've been outgunned from the start, this is crazy.
Yeah, that's a huge success.
Yeah, completely. So you can see, right? This is going to be this was a huge problem, but as we come towards the time of Operation Crusader, which we know is in the second half of November onwards. The Axis, because predominantly the Germans start to return in force. They start sending in more units. And this is like where we see, from November to towards the end of the year, you know, the British take also a hammering. So you lose the Ark Royal, it's a carrier, and
Yeah.
we know how much it hurts to lose a fleet carrier,
Oh yeah.
right, from the Pacific War. It was sunk by a U-boat. Then HMS Barham, which was a Queen Elizabeth class battleship, was also sunk. And then, the British would lose another couple of cruisers and a destroyer as well before the turn of the year. And these were all around the area of Malta. So, this actually was so bad that, with the increased aerial presence and threat from the Luftwaffe, that, Allied naval forces were on the back foot now.
Yeah.
And, when and I think the British would be suffering heavy, heavy losses, against the Germans when Luftwaffe comes up, because now towards the end of the year, we know Albert Kesselring comes back. He is given like command over the area, and you know they have the BF-110s and the Ju-88s, and the British are taking a hammering because the Hurricane unfortunately is not an aircraft that can stand up to the Germans in a dogfight. It's a great
No.
ground attack aircraft, and or a bomber killer, but it cannot hold its own in a dogfight. And so this is where we will see, like, the British start taking another hammering. So it continues with the trend that we've seen, the shifting of the pendulum,
Yeah, it's like a
between
boxing
Malta.
match.
Yeah. So, I guess this is all of it for, Malta. But as you can see, right, the start of the year, Axis were supreme. Then when the Luftwaffe was withdrawn for Barbarossa, the Allies reigned supreme.
Yep.
Luftwaffe returns, then they're on the back foot. So, but this did have its effect, right? Like Rommel was basically sitting for 3, 4 months, pretty much just trying to stock up, because you can't advance unless you have sufficient stocks of your material.
Yeah, of course. And well,
So,
in the meantime, just to talk about our old friend Archibald Wavell, he had attempted in the previous episode to lift the siege of Tobruk, but he had failed. And now it's June of 1941. He gets relieved by General Sir Claude Auchinleck, who is going to come under immediate pressure by Sir Winston Churchill to launch another offensive to lift the siege of Tobruk, codenamed Operation Crusader. Churchill, throughout this entire North African campaign, just keeps putting pressure on his commanders to throw offensives. Does not want to at all be passive, which it does pan out, mind you, for the British in the end. But I think it has more to do with kind of convoys getting sunk and logistics in the end. But as you
I
said, it's
think,
yeah,
yeah, I think the one thing is, I think Churchill at this point, because public sentiment in US start of the war was very isolationist, and Churchill,
yeah,
he did devote a lot of the time to try to see if the pendulum swings towards, America entering the war, or at least, getting supplies. So, there were like stuff from the Battle of Britain, but here the reason why Tobruk is very important is not only it's a port, right, which can handle at least maybe 10% of the access supply requirements. We It's also like something that he's been selling to the US public, like the defiance in the face of the Deutsche Africa Corps,
yeah.
the gallant defenders of Tobruk and everything. So this was like his big USP. So obviously he wants to keep it. So I guess that's why he's been very aggressive. And Churchill unfortunately was that guy who looks at it on paper but doesn't consider the ground reality. You know,
Yeah, I guess in some ways it's like a small Stalingrad situation.
It's true, but I don't know. I think he's always been the kind of guy who will see, oh, you have 10 divisions, so that's 150,000 men. Why you say you only have 50,000? Not considering, like, there's going to be training, or, men are injured or whatever, so you have only 50,000 effective troops.
Yeah,
That
true.
actually doesn't count to Churchill, you know?
Yep. And there's actually been some time that's gone by, as you had mentioned. Rommel's kind of stuck waiting for supplies to really pick up. But by November of 1941, Auchinleck, he's now controlling the Eighth Army, which is led by Lieutenant General Alan Cunningham. And there's also the forces at Tobruk who are still receiving supplies via the Royal Navy. There's some forces out in the desert known as the Oasis Force. There's some reserve forces. Altogether, the Eighth Army at this point is about 118,000 men on paper. They've got almost 800 tanks, including now the new Crusader tank, which is it's a cruiser model, and they have American M3 Stuarts alongside a lot of aircraft. They're getting just over 700 aircraft. And I guess, for the audience, we've talked a lot about, well, we've made fun of the Italian tanks. We've really talked about the German tanks. You got the Panzers 1 to 3 models coming out that are very impressive. And the British didn't have anything really to counter them until now. The Crusader, it's got almost like 40 millimeters of armor. It has a 2-pounder gun. Later variants will have actually a larger gun, but for now it's going to be the 2-pounder. But the M3 Stuart, which is going to kind of take the limelight in this episode, it can go up to about 50 millimeters of armor, give or take where it is on the vehicle, and it has a 37 millimeter gun mounted to it, which sounds small, but it's actually quite effective.
It's actually crazy because the Crusader tanks 2-pounder, that's pretty much a 40 millimeter gun. So,
Yeah,
but
but
I think what's quite impressive is the Crusader does have a fairly good range, and at least compared to our old fortress, the Matilda, at least can maintain a off-road speed of 15 miles per hour.
yeah, no, the M3 is it's not a whale. It can actually move. It's gonna be performing quite well. I mean, I think it's a much more even match now. The advantage, if I remember correctly, the M3 Stuart outranges some of the German Panzers, and that was problematic for them when they were fighting it until their other models come out, which just trump everything that the British will ever have. But for Operation Crusader, Auchinleck's going to be pitting himself against the Africa Corps, and he's going to be relying on the 7th Armored Division. This is kind of the iron fist of the British for the entire North African campaign. He also has the 1st South African Division to cover his left flank. The 13th Corps and the 4th Armored Brigade, they're going to perform a clockwise flanking advance west of Sidi Omar. Audience, if you don't have a map, it will be a little bit difficult to follow along. I'll do my best to try and give you an idea of where all this is. But I guess you're picturing it's the northern coast of Africa, and a lot of these locations are going to be located almost like they're port cities. Nothing goes too far south. So whenever there's a hook, it's a southern hook going around, almost always. Uh, they're going to need to hook to hit the rear of the Axis. The Indian 4th Division, they want to try and pin down the Axis forces between the Halfaya Pass and Sidi Omar. Again, the Halfaya Pass is this natural bottleneck area in North Africa, and whoever holds it has an unbelievable advantage because your anti-tank weapons are basically going to make sure any armored columns trying to come in are destroyed. The only way to really take it is with heavy artillery, and both sides have a lot of artillery to defend or attack with. And the 2nd New Zealand Division, they're going to try and hook south of Sidi Omar to attack Fort Capuzzo. That's changed hands more than like 8 times at this point, and Salam. The 30th Corps, they're going to advance further south through the Gabra Saleh and then towards Tobruk, which it's an understatement. Whenever you're trying to go that far south, it's over really rough terrain. It's very far distance-wise. It consumes a lot of fuel. You can get lost. Mind you, the British have much better efforts at figuring out where they're going than, like, let's say the Italians. So they'll probably be able to do it. And after the Axis armor is annihilated, if this is even a possibility, the 7th Armored Division and the 13th Corps would advance to Bardia, then Tobruk, where the 70th Infantry Division would perform a breakout. So they're the main, I'd say they're about 90% of the units over at Tobruk that are under siege right now. So if you were looking at this on a map, basically you would look at Tobruk. There's a bunch of trapped units there. They're completely surrounded, and the units that are coming from the east want to try and make what you would call a bridge to try and get them out of Tobruk. So this isn't like the British are going to actually recapture Tobruk and secure it or anything like that. They're simply trying to get their men out of there. Also,
Yeah, I
Auchinleck's,
guess.
go ahead.
Nah, it's just like Tobruk. I mean, it really has to be emphasized. I think these guys have been under siege by Rommel for like I think now. At the time of Operation Crusader, I think that would have been 6 7 months siege by now.
Oh yeah, it's one of the longer sieges of World War II. That's why I think they were known. The propaganda used to call them the rats of Tobruk when the Allies were under
Yeah,
siege.
yeah, I know. I remember reading. Yeah, I mean, like hearing this on a World War II documentary, like because the Australian forces, like they were able to hold their own, and they were like a huge thorn. Even though everyone's like, yeah, they don't have the discipline, they don't salute their officers, but hey, if you're holding your own and doing a job with the military, I don't care.
Yeah, seriously. And Auchinleck's overall plan, he's going to be supporting to support this. He's going to use a collective deception. So the way he's going to do that, he's going to try and persuade Rommel to believe that his main attack is only going to begin in early December, and he's going to be doing a sweeping outflanking maneuver through Jarabub. The deception, it works. Rommel did not believe an attack was imminent and would not be in Africa for the beginning of Operation Crusader. So Rommel was somewhere else. I don't know, but I would wager he's probably over in Italy begging the Italians for more fuel because Rommel makes many flights to Rome to do that, as he was given quite a terrible campaign, to be honest. Much like how the Japanese tossed guys onto the islands without having real plans on how they were going to supply them with materials. The Axis didn't have an answer to how to protect their convoys going through the Mediterranean. It's going to
And
be a problem.
you're relying on your, like, let's call it like your only big partner in Europe to help you. And unfortunately, this partner's even less supplied and prepared for a war than Germany ever reached. So
Yeah, and
it's because if you even like read, like the suffering also that the Italian people also like in terms of rationing, I think by now, I think the rationing for men was, I think, cut down to about 1100 calories a day.
oh yeah,
So, and so I know like Rommel is just like, it's like, just trying to hit his head against a stone wall.
and he's really angry because he wants to be in the Eastern Front. He doesn't want to be here. I mean,
Yeah, true.
they,
But
yeah.
I don't know if in the Eastern Front though, at least he would have been able to feed his ego in terms of like, creating that cult of himself.
It would be interesting if Rommel was involved in Operation Barbarossa. I I don't know because again, Operation Barbarossa, a large reason it failed was because of logistics as well. It's kind of similar in scope to what Rommel's facing here, where the
It's
Germans
just
get,
it's just
yeah.
not a magnitude that is difficult for us to really comprehend.
Oh yeah, because once they make it to the Battle of Moscow, it's something people forget is that was the extremity of their logistical supply line. They literally were a glass cannon fighting at that point, and that it all it makes it only so much worse when the Soviets throw their counteroffensive with the new troops from the Far East. Just that the reason why they clobbered the Germans, other than the fact the Germans were freezing to death, was they didn't have the supplies necessary to defend themselves. And in
Yeah,
general, the Germans are not very good defensive wise.
and and there's also one more thing, because again the defense is also because Hitler will be like, nope, you guys cannot take one step back, even though he will
Yeah.
not even understand the concept of, hey, let's withdraw to this river or this hilltop and use the natural terrain to help us.
Yeah.
But it and I think Hitler did genuinely believe he takes Moscow, he's gonna win. That would never have happened. Like
Actually,
because
no. A lot of the writings, Hitler was of the mind that Moscow should not be focused upon. He
okay,
thought it was actually something that could cause him to fail. He did. It seems weird because you're going to hear a lot of the times that he blundered with the Caucasus. Sorry,
the
uh,
Caucasus.
Caucasus. Sorry, I always mess it up because I mean, if he took that, he's taking the oil from the Soviet Union. It was over, and he did know he did prioritize this. It's just unfortunately there was a lot of miscommunications as commanders and stuff. And again, you look
But
at
the thing is,
Stalingrad too.
it's also the Caucasus oil field, while were a major oil field for the Soviets. it was not their only one, and
No,
the
of course.
other their bigger ones were like I think near the Ural Mountains. So
You're
they're
not getting that.
completely out. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like I think it's if I'm not mistaken by the distance, I think it was like 600, 700 kilometers east of Moscow. Like,
Yeah, it's
and
not
we
happening.
know Moscow is the breaking point of the German logistics
Hmm.
chain. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think it does a similar thing. But you know,
All
I
right.
think Rommel was I think begging mostly for air power, if I'm not mistaken,
Yeah,
when
which
he
he's
would
not going
go
to
to
get.
Italy.
He's not getting it this time because Operation Barbarossa is taking the lion's share of air power. But
Yeah.
back in July, General Ito Garibaldi, he was replaced with General Ettore Basco because of his alleged lack of cooperation with Rommel, which it's going to be funny. The Axis forces at this point, they consist of about almost 120,000 men, with the Italian 20th, 21st Corps and the Panzergruppe Africa. Altogether, they've got almost 600 tanks. And actually, I do have in my notes, I can break it down. They have about, and this changes by time. This is actually November numbers, but they have 70 Panzer IIs, almost 140 Panzer IIIs, 35 Panzer IVs, 146 Fiat M1340s, and 162 Italian light tanks, which are those L335s, which should have just been thrown into a scrapyard because they are not useful. Honestly, I think they waste fuel, so you shouldn't have been using them. And
Ouch. At
for
least the
aircraft,
M1340 is like at least a decent. So at least I'll say like the overall percentage of like let's just call them effective fighting vehicles has gone
yeah.
up. So I'll give them that.
Well, the M1340s in a defensive role are at least better off because it's kind of like using an artillery. Because again, the problem is that their turret isn't properly mounted. It's mounted within the chassis, so you have to move the tank to shoot. It's so stupid. Like I don't know, the Italian the Italian tanks are so bad, but for air power, the Flieger for the Flieger for Africa, they've got about 140 aircraft still on them, but only about 76 of these are operational and 35 of them are the BF 109Fs. So these are top of the line. These are good fighters. 27 of those are serviceable at any given time, and they got some other 12 BF 110s.
I just want to like butt in here because the current Africa fighter corps like in the BF 109 they have one of the best World War II pilots in my book.
Oh, yeah, true.
I'm rating him up as a bet. So this guy is Hans Joachim Marseille. So ultimately he's a pilot who would unfortunately he will die in the North African campaign just before El Alamein, but he would be credited with 158 victories as a
Wow.
fighter pilot,
Yeah, that's insane.
and only seven were scored, in the Battle of Britain. And, yeah, Battle of Britain. Otherwise, it was only against the Desert Air Force.
So this guy was just a one-man army. Yeah.
In a way, yeah. So the thing is, Marseille had a very difficult start to his military career. Okay. So the thing is, when he was there, he kind of was not, I wouldn't call him a team player. Okay. Because you're supposed to fly with your wingman, keep each other covered, right? That was the standard thing. That's why everyone would fly in minimum of pair, right? And the thing is, he kind of had an also a kind of aloof attitude. Uh, and he was supposedly like known to get women over or help others, so it kind of affected morale. And I think when some of his like I think one of the people he served with in the Battle of Britain and flew as his wingman but went away for a kill and left that guy completely exposed, was a wing commander or something
Eesh.
of
Yeah.
that. So that obviously did not um do well. So the thing is, and he was an interesting character, okay, because despite his intense skill count, he always regretted it.
Huh.
Like in his diaries and everything, because he actually did see them as a duel. like it's not to kill the person. It's just a duel. Like so, destroy the
Yeah, it's
aircraft because
World War
there
One
would be
mentality.
rumors would be like he once an aircraft would be shot down, he will only strafe the grounded craft and destroy it after the allied pilot has moved away.
Hmm.
And he was known also like to land and pull out allied pilots from their wrecks. Also, he's done that.
Wow.
So this. So he's a character, okay. And the thing is, he also has a very low opinion about the Nazi high command, which is actually like some books I've read, like the common soldiers, right? So I'm not talking about generals or all these guys. Just the guys who are, the grunts, you know, they have a very low opinion of the Nazi high command, always.
I mean, I would have a low opinion too if I was in the Eastern Front, that's for sure.
That is true. So the thing is, he was kind of like, uh, in a lot of trouble with his commanders and everything because, you know, the attitude he just had, right? So to the point that, he was pretty much going to be grounded and everything for good. So I think uh, towards the end of 1940, he gets a new group in commander, Edward Newman, who basically is like, he recognizes his potential. He knows that his attitude is not good, but he said like 30 years later, he's like, he was either going to be a disciplinary problem or a great fighter. I mean, that is it. So, ultimately these guys get deployed to, North Africa. So initially, Marseille is struggling. Okay. So there's this free French pilot, James Denis, who actually would over the next few months shoot him down several times, Marseille.
Several times.
Yeah, because
Huh.
most of the, yeah, I think, or like not always shot down, but like his aircraft got. I think their first encounter, Marseille's BF 109E took around 30 shots in the cockpit area, and because he was leading forward and flying, apparently, several shots went through the glass, but behind him.
Oh,
If he
wow.
had been sitting like a normal pilot and still flying, oh, he'd be dead.
Hmm.
But again, he that is this is like towards the end of April. Then 1 month later, he again gets shot, and that's because this guy could not fly the conventional way. He just could not. Trying to go with the conventional tactics that people use, that was the common doctrine of all air forces. He was not able to adapt to that.
Hmm.
And then, and these guys, experienced pilots could feign innocence and everything. You know, it's not going to like he would not stand up. I mean, he did get uh shot down several times or something. So I think by June 1942 it was said like he had crashed or damaged 4 109s himself.
Jeez. All right.
So the thing is, his commander does is this guy, he says, find a new tactic, find something that works. And he actually spends like several months not even just training, his physical endurance and marksmanship. And by September, it is like, it's just like, I would say like, it's like, in Pokemon, like an evolution, it's like, Charmander's become Charizard in this regards because, um, in I think September 24th, that day alone, he claimed 4 hurricanes in one spell.
Wow. Yeah, that's impressive.
That is his, yeah. And the thing is, he realized that he would dive into the attack, very steep angles, and he was actually known to try to attack uh people like from the side. The common military doctrine was you come behind the aircraft. That is how, all the air forces fight. He will try to go for the side because I think he tried to find this way that will work and had with high deflection shooting and situational awareness. Those were his key USPs, and as we will see, it
Hmm.
will be insane. I'll say this now because it's just impressive not to. Towards just before he passes away, that one day he shot down 17 aircraft in 1942.
Jeez, that's insane.
But yeah, so this is a guy whose reputation amongst the Axis forces will be second to only Rommel.
Hmm. Oh,
That's that is something. And then, I'll just switch briefly to the British because, the RAF has kind of had a mixed time right now because, the way that they've been running. And granted, a lot of the problems are due to the fact they're not getting the good aircraft. But, June 1940, I think their fortunes change because of their high command changes. So you get Arthur Tedder takes overall command of the RAF in the region. And as you know, he is going to be a very instrumental leader for, the allies of World War II because he doesn't give a damn about your nationality or service rivalries like, guys like Patton or Montgomery will do. He's kind of like the Eisenhower in that sense. It's trying to find the best plan. And one thing is, he has the support of the Ministry of Production and the Air Chief of Staff, like Peter Portal. He has their support and he wants to find the right guys to do the job. He doesn't care of anything else. And I think someone did give Arthur Conningham, aka Mary, that's what his common name was, known, to take over the operational command. So it's kind of like, there's like the Claude Auchinleck, and he Cunningham is gonna become like your Alan Cunningham equivalent.
hmm.
He's gonna have the operation command, and what this guy does is he transforms the attitude of the RAF. Like, first of all, these guys are gonna be pushing for closer cooperation between the army and Air Force. And this is something that they will even champion when, the Americans would later come into the war. We go into Husky, we go to D-Day. That thing of close air support and close coordination, but still keeping the Air Force independent of the Army. These guys were the champions of it.
Hmm.
And, we will see the results. And, you know, the thing is, Conningham comes because, now the RF is kind of like, it's in a pickle. They've taken a beating, but you know, while we will later see throughout, the British Army's command, you will see the blunders that will be done under Auchinleck, Montgomery, Neil Richie, and everything. You will not see the same thing in the RAF headquarters. Like he says, I want this thing done. We will do it. But the thing is, down to the last man, right? Like the maintenance staff of airfields, the tactical sergeants, the pilots, the wing commanders, group captains, everyone will soon know what they're doing. So, as we see the pendulum move, like, the British advance retreat, advance retreat. Thanks to his way of this kind of leapfrog system, that the RAF will continue to remain just grow in strength, thanks to these tactics that he's going to develop. And as we, this will come much later though, when we build up towards El Alamein. That's where we will see like the real damage done by the Desert Air Force.
All right. Back to the action in North Africa. Rommel, he's built fortified positions while he's been waiting along the escarpment running from the sea all the way to Bardia, and eastwards along the coast to Solam, and westwards to the border wire and Fort Capuzzo. So these are very fortified positions. They're not what we refer to, well, as Rommel referred to as Devil's Gardens yet, but we see the evolution. It's coming through. The 8th Army, they're going to launch their surprise attack at dawn on November the 18th, with the 7th and 22nd Armored Brigades advancing towards Tobruk, as the 13th Corps advances towards Sidi Omar. The next day, the 22nd Armored Brigade, they attack the 132nd Arete Division around Bir el Gubi, knocking out 34 Italian tanks while losing 25 Crusaders. So some of those anti-tank guns are actually doing some damage here, because I don't think the Italian tanks are doing much. The 7th Armored Brigade and the 7th Support Group, they're going to storm Sidi Rezeg Airfield, capturing 19 Axis aircraft. Pretty big success there. And over on the right flank, the 4th Armored Brigade engages 60 tanks of the 21st Panzer Division south of Gambut, losing 23 Stuarts, and that's quite a slug match between the two. On the 20th, the 22nd Armored Brigade, they re-engaged the 132nd Arate Division with the 7th Armored Brigade, repelling infantry of the 15th Panzers and the 25th Bologna Division at Sidi Rezeghi. The 4th Armored Brigade, they engaged the 21st Panzer Division. Fortunately, just as the 15th Panzer Division is ordered to go to Sidi Azez, where they find no Allied armor, so they basically were kind of duped by the British doing a feint there. Lieutenant General Cunningham, he hopes to overwhelm the Axis tank force with his larger tank force because the Allied tanks, I mean, it's nearly 2-1 at this point, and he wants to do so. But at the same time, he attaches the 4th Armored Brigade to the 13th Corps, allowing the 22nd Armored Brigade to get sidetracked into a fight with the 132nd Arete Division, and he permits the 7th Armored Brigade to advance towards Tobruk. So in essence, he's dispersed his tanks, whereas he could have consolidated them like a fist to actually, just go, as we say in English, a mano with Rommel, force Rommel to bring out all of his panzers and engage in like a Battle of Kursk like battle. Instead, he disperses his tanks very thinly and he kind of sidetracks them like this, and it's not to his benefit. During the
I think
afternoon, yeah,
I would just add, I guess the still seems that the best armor tactic is literally like concentrating a sufficient force to give that one single punch rather than like, operate them as infantry support or spread them out over a large front.
that's the lesson that they learned in World War One when the French were when the French were using tanks for the first time. They didn't mass them up. They used them to kind of support individual infantry units going up to try and storm positions. But the first time when they actually massed as much tanks as they could together and then they launched them, that was one of the big successes of World War One. And from that
That
point
was
on,
Cambrai, if I'm not mistaken, right?
yeah,
The Battle of Cambrai.
and I
Yeah,
mean
I think
that
that was like
dictates,
they
yeah.
had, yeah, I think with thanks to this, I think Fuller formed the first ideas of like, massed armored warfare, which, I think that was the basis for Guderian's
Yeah.
doctrine to form.
Yeah, exactly. And you're looking here at what Cunningham is doing, and basically he's kind of gambling with a lot of this by dispersing what is like the strongest parts of his military. He's hoping he's taking everything at once, and it's not happening. So it's providing really bad results because he's on the offensive, and in this type of warfare, those that are on defense are using anti-tank guns and artillery, which is the killer of tanks. Not to mention the minefields that the British tanks are running into. So he's losing a lot of armor by doing this. During the afternoon, the 4th Armored Brigade, they're attacked by the Afrika Korps, and they lose 40 tanks. That's devastating. They're reduced to about 2/3 of their original strength, which was 164 tanks. By nightfall, Rommel, he's pulling all of his armor northwest for an attack against Sidi Rezeg. Now, the Allied plan for November the 21st called for the 70th Division to try and break out of Tobruk. So they were hoping they were going to form a bridge while cutting the Axis lines of communication. The night prior, the Tobruk garrison, they prepared to do so by they began planting minefields, gapping some wires, placing 4 bridges over the anti-tank ditch so that they can get over quickly. The Polish Carpathian Brigade, they perform a diversion at dawn against the 17th Pavia Division with 100-piece artillery bombardment against their position and also against the Bologna Division and the Brescia Division. The 7th Armored Brigade and the 7th Support Group, they advanced from Sidi Rezek to capture the ridge above Tri Capuzzo. As the 6th Royal Tank Regiment, they're going to aid the breakthrough force at El Duba. Now, the 70th Division, they perform a 3-pronged assault while they're doing this, and it's against a series of strong points that Rommel had come up with during his siege of Tobruk. And this is barring the way to El Duba. They do manage to overrun the 17th Pavia Division. By the afternoon, they're advancing about 5.6 kilometers towards El Duba, but then they're forced to pause as the 7th Armored Brigade fails to link up with them. So in my explanation, if you're looking at this on a map, basically you're looking at two sides of the Allied forces trying to wedge their way through Axis units and divisions to form a bridge so that they can get in safely. They're almost touching, but not quite. And this is a big catastrophe. It's a bad situation. The second
Yeah.
Black Watch Battalion, they charge through massed machine gun fire, trying to attack strong points. Like one is known as the Tiger. They lose about 200 men and their commanding officer. These are like heavily fortified positions, trenches, pillboxes and such, artillery, everything. It's not fun. The 7th Division, they're unable to capture the Togun strong point, defended by the 25th Belonging Division, so they're pretty much halted. Meanwhile, the artillery Botcher Group, the 5th Panzer, and the 155th Leichte regiments, they're fighting a costly battle with the 4th, 7th, and 22nd Armored Brigades over City Rezet and the surrounding heights. So this is like
Well,
pretty intense, large scale tank battles going on.
I think I'll also just say, and Rommel said the Italian soldiers were completely useless, right?
you know, he hangs them to dry, and then when they give everything that they've got, he blames them for like the losses. While for most of the campaign, whenever the Axis forces are like losing, he pulls the German forces out. Like his Africa Corps, he saves them first, and he just basically sacrifices the Italians. So it's the
As
one case where you can't blame the Italians. Everywhere else in World War II,
uh,
you can blame them. You know?
yeah, no, and like I think even the Allies noticed, like, there were times where the Italian units, like, despite the reputation of the country as a whole, they noted like these guys are fighting like lions or ferociously, whatever. And this is like one example.
There was also an issue of a boost of morale. Like it's kind of sad to say, but I would gamble to say the Italians were fighting better with Rommel technically leading them. I mean, technically he's not supposed to be leading them. It's supposed to be some Italian commanders, but Rommel's kind of the guy really in charge of everything, and I think it was a huge morale booster for just the Axis forces in general. So it provided them with something as like kind of a boost. And the fact that they had actually made successes, because up until Rommel shows up in Africa, the Italians don't really succeed in anything. It's just defeat after defeat. So it's pretty rough.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Now the 7th Armored Brigade and the 7th Support Group, they're facing the Africa Corps at Cité des Zeb, and they're losing about 28 tanks. As the 5th South African Brigade, they're fighting the 132nd Arete Division at Bir el Gubi before digging in at Bir el Haid. Rommel realizes now that he has a pretty good chance to break through to Tobruk. As the 7th Armored Division, they're too busy against the 21st Panzer Division. They're really like the tank battles are going on each day, and you know where everyone is. Because the scary thing about like mobilized warfare is not when you're engaging the tanks, it's actually when you don't know where the tanks are. Because if these units are highly mobile and quick enough, they can outflank you, they can attack weak points, they can take a city or something from you. So he knows where the
Yeah,
tanks
especially like
are.
in it's kind of like a featureless thing, so it's so hard to, like except unless you're like maybe operating near like a place like Fort Capuzzo or Tobruk,
Yeah.
right, which has some landmark, right? You can just say, oh yeah, I think I saw them 50 miles south of Tobruk, but that is just a wild guess.
Yeah, well, during the Battle of France, the famous Ghost Division, it was one of the most terrifying things, facing the Allies. Is there's this it was almost like Mongolian Empire. They have these forces that they're seemingly attacking all of these cities at great distances. And you're like, how are there all these different like army groups that the Mongols are throwing? It's not. It's just one really, really fast and mobile Mongol group attacking each location one by one. But it gives the appearance that there's just much more of the enemy than there is. It's terrifying. But
Yeah, and that is Rommel, by the way.
yeah, yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah, there's the similarities. During the
I
night,
know
Rom,
because the Ghost Division was his.
yeah, of course. And during the
Yeah.
night, Rommel he divides his forces, so he dispatches the 21st Panzers and the Special Purpose Africa Division that's just been made up to defend between Tobruk and Sidi Rezet. And the 15th Panzer Division is going to Ghazi El Arid. I apologize for mispronouncing some of these locations. It's a little rough this episode on me. On the 22nd, the 21st Panzer Division, they engage the much larger 7th Armored Division and the 5th South Africans at Sidi Rezet. And they prove themselves tactically superior. They drive them back and they destroy another 50 tanks and they recapture the airfield. That's a devastating loss. The 8th Army now has suffered the loss of 530 tanks altogether. Most of these destroyed, mind you, not completely destroyed. Most of these are damaged, not completely destroyed, but still, casualties are casualties.
But that's still like 70% of their force is kind of like knocked out in a way. Let's use
It's
that term, right?
and it's honestly unforgivable from the commander's point of view. It's a lot has to do with him dispersing the tanks the way he did initially. He was, you know, dragging his foot, honestly. He wasn't making a real decision on where to attack in strength. And the Axis,
Uh,
they've lost like 100
This was
tanks at different ways.
This would be like Alan Cunningham's decisions, right?
Yeah,
At this
yes, it would be.
moment.
And this is 530 tanks, and against the Axis, we're losing maybe like 100 tanks in 4 days of fighting these tank battles. That same day, Major General Ronald Scobie, he orders his forces to consolidate, to widen up the corridor for the 8th Army to link up with the Tobruk guys. And this is a very desperate fight, by the way. If you're looking at this, for example, on like a YouTube episode that'll have like an animated map, it's like they almost link up and then it just never quite happens. The 2nd York and Lancaster Regiment, with tank support, they capture Strongpoint Tiger, opening a 7,000-yard gap between the corridor and El Duba, but assaults against the strong points Dalby Square and Tuggen fail, so they're still stuck. Meanwhile, the 5th New Zealand Brigade, they launch a failed attack against Bir Girba, and the 7th Indian Brigade captures City Omar along with most of the strong points on the Libyan frontier. But still, they can't break through. On the 23rd, the 5th New Zealand Brigade's advance effectively isolates the Axis forces in Sidi Omar, Solom, and Halfaya from Bardia and their supply route. The 6th New Zealand Brigade's advance to Sidi Rezeg inadvertently stumbles upon the HQ of the Special Purpose Africa Division. They destroy it, and then they capture most of the staff, which is pretty incredible, to be honest, to just come across like a general staff like that. And at this point, Rommel conceived that a counterdash to the wire along the Egyptian and Libyan frontier to relieve the Axis forces holding out against the 13th Corps and their lines of communication is probably in his best interests. Psst. Hey you ever hear me talk about some great Pacific War movie or documentary like Pearl Harbor Minute by Minute over on Netflix and feel the urge to watch it for yourself? Uh-oh, you live in Japan and your Netflix doesn't have it? Must suck to be you.
Sucks to be me right now.
Oh wow, season 4 of Demon Slayer is out. Oh wait, I can't watch it on Canadian Netflix, but it's over on Japan Netflix? Whatever will I do?
Oh no, no.
Being blocked from regional content? With private internet access, you too can watch Demon Slayer Season 4 by switching your IP address to Japan.
Yes! Hell yeah!
Why stop with Japan? With private internet access, you can change your IP address to over 84 different countries and every single US state, giving you access to region-restricted content all over the world.
Nice.
Many websites and services like Netflix are only accessible depending on your physical location, but private internet access helps you overcome these restrictions. Think about it. Without private internet access, it's like paying for a TV series and missing out on the latest season. Shots fired, Demon Slayer on Canadian Netflix.
Is that like a personal attack or something?
Ever fear people are gonna find your Google searches?
Banzai! Banzai! Banzai!
FBI, open up!
Private internet access makes sure that those Google searches remain a buried secret, as private internet access encrypts your internet access and has a no logs policy. Think you're safe with the local coffee shop's free Wi-Fi? No, you are certainly not. Private internet access gives you more privacy features than any other software and real-time protection from malware and trackers, giving you peace of mind knowing those Google searches remain seen by you and you alone. Private internet access has a no-log policy that they've defended in court, which means they are not storing any of your browsing data. Hey, are you like me using different devices under one household? Private internet access is available on all platforms and protects an unlimited amount of devices at the same time. I personally use private internet access to unblock movies and TV series from all across the globe, and I sleep easier writing scripts for my YouTube channel and others knowing my data is secure. Look, this is a no-brainer. Sign up with my link in the description of this video to get 83% off, plus 4 months for free, so it ends up being only around $2 per month. Signing up for private internet access is risk-free. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and 24/7 customer support is available. So don't forget to click www.piavpn.com/The Pacific War Channel, and a big thanks to Private Internet Access for sponsoring this video. So, this is going to be called, what's codenamed Operation Brandung, and it's going to be unleashed at 3 p.m. Rommel concentrates his armor against the 5th South African Brigade at Sidi Rezeg, and they overrun the 5th South African Brigade, destroying 11 tanks of the 22nd Armored Brigade, but they lose about 72 of their 162 tanks in a very costly tactical victory. And again, the Allies came into this with overwhelming tank numbers. The Axis were on the back foot; they didn't have as much, so any loss for the Axis is pretty egregious, and they can't repair them as quickly as the Allies. They're very far from their supply. Their supply
They
lines
can't
just can't.
repair it and they can't produce it also.
Yeah.
Like,
Whereas the Allies can. The
it's-
Allies are relying on, all the industry over in Egypt to just keep pushing up to the front. Got repair crews, supplies, pieces for the repair parts and everything. For the
yeah,
Allies, they
and I
can
think this is
gamble.
yeah, and actually, like, it's just as you would like stressing on the point, right? Like of the Axis can't afford to lose. Like people don't realize, like, even if the US has not yet entered the war,
Mhm.
Britain is rearming and ramping up its war machine way more faster than Germany,
Well,
I think, gives it credit for.
I
And
mean,
like,
America's
sorry,
not in the war, but
yeah,
like these Stuarts, the Lend Leases,
yeah,
America's
true.
dollars are in the war.
Yeah, true. And like, I think Roosevelt's already started his rearmament much
Yeah.
quicker so that they are ready. But, even the British themselves were also like they were like, focused on mass production and ramping up rapidly. Like we see the first things with like, Beaverbrook in the Battle of Britain, but
Mhm.
it's all facets of their armed forces because even at the same time, like, wars declared, Britain still has, at that moment, is building about 50, 60 combat ships in its own shipyards at the same time.
Oh yeah. And I haven't really brought it up here yet, but despite the fact we keep referring to Rommel commanding, it's Rommel's battles in this. He's not the supreme commander, and he technically doesn't command some of the Italian units. He has to work with others, and there's a lot of miscommunication. And to be honest, the Italian tanks, I don't even know if most of them at this point even have radio sets or are using them properly, and a lot of the cost to the Axis armor is a result of this. So the Commando Supremo in Rome, they place the 20th Mobile Corps under Rommel's direct command at this point after seeing the losses, because I guess they're basically panicking, and they're putting their faith in Rommel, which is good because it's better than the current situation, that's for sure. Meanwhile,
I mean, better than most of their commanders. That's
oh yeah,
110%.
the first Italian commander when they were trying to invade Egypt, technically, he was not bad. He even had a proper doctrine. He just didn't use it for
Graziani.
yeah, Galatiani. I haven't read up on why he personally decided to not use the blitzkrieg like doctrine that he was used to and his men had trained for, mind you. And I don't know. It's very bizarre. They had a chance in the early
I'll
days.
just say brilliant. Just brilliant.
Yeah.
That's all I can say.
Yeah. But meanwhile, the 70th Division, they're attacking the 25th Boulogne Division, trying to break through to City Rezeg, but the 17th Pavia Division, they arrive just in time to check them again. The 6th New Zealand Brigade, they capture point 175. The 4th New Zealand Brigade, they take Gambut. The 5th New Zealand Brigade, they capture the upper parts of Solom. And the 7th Indian Brigade capture Italian positions near City Omar. Late on the 23rd, Rommel, he feels the threat of an allied relief of Tobruk is basically over. They've halted. The guys trying to get out and the guys trying to come and form the bridgehead have also been halted, and they've taken way too many tank losses. So now he's feeling a bit more confident. And he's now hoping to lift the siege of Bardia, Salam, and Halfaya. So he just kind of wants to clean out all of his positions. And he believes this is possible because the 7th Armored Division has effectively been defeated. I mean, they're still there. They still have tanks, but they're a fraction of what they were. But he does not realize that there's Allied supply dumps lying on the path of the border. So the British, stop calling them the Allies. The British have mastered this art of placing these supply dumps kind of all across the desert that they can rely on in these forward positions. Something the Axis definitely will not have in this campaign. And this is something that Rommel's not aware of. So they're very quick to resupply. And this actually is going to pretty much cost him the battle. The next morning, he unleashes as part of Operation Brandung, what is called the Brandung Force, against the remnants of the Allied forces who are now blocking the routes of retreat to Egypt. The German and Italian tanks scatter the rear echelon support units in their path, splitting up the 30th Corps, and they nearly cut off the 13th Corps. And you got to imagine if they were able to do such a thing, they'd be taking tens of thousands of prisoners. It would be
Oh, easy,
devastating. Yeah. And this is something that's quite normal in the North Africa campaign, as we've seen. It's incredible the amount of prisoners they take each side. On the 25th, the 15th Panzer Division, they advanced to Sidi Azez under the Desert Air Force, helping them out as they attack the 5th Panzer Regiment, which is effectively destroyed by the 7th Indian Brigade at Sidi Omar. And the rest of the 21st Panzer Division is advancing to Al-Faya. In doing so, the Axis columns, they become exposed and their supply lines are now very stretched. Meanwhile, the defenders of Strongpoint Tugun exhaust their ammunition, their provisions, and they're forced to surrender. So it's looking like there's going to be a breakout. On the 26th, the 21st Panzer Division at Halfaya, the 132nd Arete Division, they attack Fort Capuzzo, and the 2nd New Zealand Division, they capture Belhamed, and Sidi Rezeg. So Sidi Rezeg has actually changed hands 3 times at this point. Now, early on the 27th at Bardia, Rommel, he meets with his generals, like Walter Neumann-Sickel and Johann von Radenstein, and they all agree that the most important thing for the Africa Corps now is to return to Tobruk, where they can hopefully just hold back the siege and make sure the 70th Division don't get out. But it's looking like the 70th Division is starting to gain the initiative finally. The 15th Panzer Division, they attack the 22nd New Zealand Battalion at Sidi Azez, overwhelming and forcing their surrender. It's a terrible loss. 21st Panzer Division, they engaged the 5th New Zealand Brigade at Bir el Manastir, delaying its return to Tobruk. And this allows the 2nd New Zealand Division to link up, finally, this is the first time, with the 70th Division, as Auchinleck is now relieved by Lieutenant General, sorry.
You mean Alan Cunningham is...
Yeah, I just read my notes and I'm dyslexic. If the audience doesn't know, I do this actually a lot. With aircraft numbers. So Auchinleck, he relieves Lieutenant General Cunningham with Major General Neil Richie. And that's probably a great decision because Cunningham is not doing well. It's, I have to say.
Okay, while I think this is where I'm going to comment, I'll just say, while Cunningham wasn't doing a great job, as you'll see, having Neil Richie wasn't anything, it's not doing it any better at one bit, I'll tell you that much. Because, the thing is, Richie has no experience commanding. So even still right now, even though officially he's a major general right now, it's still not a permanent major general commission.
True.
He's been acting major general since October of 1940. Okay, and now you have to he's now temporary major general at this moment.
Yes,
like
temporary,
slightly before. Yeah, and then they'll have to now make him a temporary lieutenant general because there were corps commanders already engaged, which I think might have been a better choice in my view. Because the thing is, I get it. Auchinleck was also kind of hamstrung by needing men who were already somewhat aware of the situation. But as you'll see later, like the way Neil Richie runs the 8th Army, yeah, that's all. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
He runs it with democracy. How do we decide major actions in 1942, Neil Richie? Show of hands. When as a general of the army, you're supposed to be decisive.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So this is where I just said I don't think it's that great of a choice. It's not like I'm not saying Cunningham was good, but it's not like you've appointed someone better. That's all.
No, they could have. They had to get rid of Cunningham, but they could have chosen someone else. Mind you, it is a crisis situation, so decisions are never made that well in crisis situations.
Yeah, unfortunately, because they did have corps commanders and lieutenant generals Willoughby Norrie and Reid Godwin Austen. Granted, I guess they were amongst the older age of generals, if I'm not mistaken.
All right.
So I'm not sure because I think Nori at this time would be approaching like 50, and Austin is like even more older. So,
Oof. Well, on the 28th, seeking to destroy the what we're calling the Tobruk corridor, this bridge, Rommel, he places the 15th Panzer Division. He's going to have them engage the 4th and 22nd Armor Brigades. As the 70th and 2nd New Zealand Divisions, they're going to be fighting the 8th Bersaglieri Regiment. And the next day, the Afrika Corps, they failed to perform a pincer attack against Sidi Rezegh, seeing Major General Lavenstein captured in the process. It's pretty devastating. It's one of
that's
Rommel's core commanders. Yeah. But in
ouch.
in the afternoon, the 132nd Arete Division, they're nearly overrunning the 21st New Zealand Battalion at point 175, but they were saved at the last minute by the 1st South African Brigade. On December the 1st, the Afrika Corps is now attacking Balhamed, destroying the 20th Battalion there, seeing the 2nd New Zealand Division suffer 880 deaths, almost 2,000 wounded, and another 2,000 captured. That's devastating. The 7th Armored Division.
Generally, how big were the divisions? I guess 10 to 15,000, right?
Yeah, 10,
Depending.
15,000.
So, yeah, this is like almost at least 33% casualties then.
Yeah, that's very heavy. It's devastating. Ugh,
Yeah.
especially yeah. The 7th Armored Division, they try to assist the New Zealanders, but the Tobruk corridor is then cut off by the 15th Panzers and the 101 Trist divisions. So now the 2nd New Zealander Division, they got about only 3,500 men and 700 vehicles, and they're performing a fighting withdrawal all the way back towards Egypt. So absolutely tragic. Almost opened that corridor up, almost performed what they wanted to do, albeit at a huge cost. Even if they managed to do what they wanted to do, this was a very costly venture.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the 2nd of December, believing the battle for Tobruk was completely won and done, Rommel then he dispatches 2 columns led by Colonel Eric Geisler and Lieutenant Colonel Gustav George Nabe to open routes to Bardia, Capuzzo, and Salam. On the 3rd, the Axis columns, they're spotted by aerial reconnaissance, allowing the 5th New Zealand Brigade to ambush the northern column along the Bardia Road, almost completely annihilating them. Meanwhile,
I
the
think
southern...
this is I'll just talk
Yeah.
about like this is an example of like the new air strategy that they want
Yeah.
to implement, like with the close proximity of the Army and Air Force headquarters working side by side. But it also shows why the Air Force should be led by Air Force personnel.
Mhm.
Because, see, obviously, this is a great example of coordination, but as later Tedder and Conningham will say, the army commander was going to be limited by his field of vision. You might see 200 tanks charging your way and will want air support. But at the same time, reconnaissance will see, oh yeah, there's a force of 700, 800 tanks behind them. It would be better to attack that larger force. So this is showing how the Desert Air Force is going to play a very critical role in really hamstringing Rommel's Africa.
Absolutely. And the Desert Air Force, they're actually particularly nasty when they're hitting the convoys that are just trying to get to, because in many of these battles, Rommel is going to find himself placing his armor too far forward, and then they get stuck in these kind of bottlenecks between minefields and such. And it only allows for very tight passages for the supply trucks to come up to feed his fuel and his water to these armored units. And the Desert Air Force, if they can find them at the right time, they can take out a supply convoy. Thus, you basically have trapped an entire armored brigade, maybe even a division. Who knows? It can be very devastating.
Yeah, and another reason they were so effective is for quite a while, Conningham like forbade his Hurricane and other pilots from engaging in aerial combat with the
Yes.
Messerschmitts.
Yeah, that's very true.
Just he's like, focus on the supplies, focus on the trucks. That'll screw them over.
Yeah.
And it works.
And meanwhile, for the other columns, the southern column, they're advancing along the Tre Capuzzo, and they run into the Gold Force. It's an ad hoc force, and they're bombarded by artillery, Blenheims, and Hurricanes, just absolutely devastated. On the 4th of December, Rommel is now resolved to concentrate his strength against the growing threat of the 30th Corps in the south. Meanwhile, the 11th Brigade, they're attacking the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 136th Giovanni Fascisti Regiment at point 174, as the 17th Pavia and the 102nd Trento divisions are engaging the 70th Division within the Tobruk perimeter. So these poor guys who thought that they were breaking out finally of this siege are now finding themselves under hell of a fight, just trying to get back to Tobruk. The next day, the Africa Corps and the 132nd Arate Division, they helped break the 11th Brigade, who are being replaced with the 22nd Guards and the 4th Armor Brigade. And within the next day's fighting, Major General Silko was mortally wounded. So that's two commanders that are down for the count. By the 7th, Rommel realizes his forces cannot contain the growing Allied forces, and he doesn't have any reserves. The Comando Supremo notified him the supply situation is not going to improve until the end of December, which it barely will. So Rommel is he's forced to abandon Tobruk in the end. He has to order the Italian.
I think this was like, where I said, this is like now we'll see the change in the fortunes in the supply battle, because later we will see, the Flieger Code 10 now coming back in full force. So,
but it's a little bit ironic, because if you were looking at this, you're looking at the battle, Rommel has arguably won a great battle here, but logistically he can't sustain it. So the British are kind of just throwing waves of people. Well, you can almost see it as like the old human wave attack. They're losing so much, but they're gaining all of this back, from Egypt by repairing tanks, sending new fresh units forward, and they just keep clobbering them. And Rommel's going to be forced to abandon Tobruk. So he orders the Italian and German garrisons at Bardia, Halfaya, and Sarum. They all have to hold out as long as they can so that, his precious Africa Corps can withdraw. So that night, the 70th Division, they capture strong points Walter, Freddy, point 157, and the White Knoll, probably now figuring out, it looks like, the Axis are give up this area. Tobruk is relieved on the 10th as Lieutenant General Neil Richie reorganizes the 8th Army, greatly improving armor and infantry coordination, because obviously there was a lot of problems when Cunningham was running things. Again, I keep bringing it up. The dispersing of armor was kind of the crux of this calamity, we'll call it. Meanwhile, Rommel, he forms a new defensive line. It's called the Gazella Line, placing the Italian 10th Corps near the coast, 21st Corps inland, and the Africa Corps behind the southern flank, ready for counterattacks. On the 13th, the 5th New Zealand Brigade, they start attacking the coastal line. The 5th Indian Brigade, they attack El Hamza's flank. As the 7th Armored Division, they swing really wide to try and get behind the Axis lines of supply. The 5th Indian Brigade, they capture point 204, as the 7th Indian Brigade protects their left flank, and they're met by the Africa Corps, who end up losing 15 tanks, which doesn't sound a lot, but they're really, really starting to dwindle in tanks. On the 14th, the Polish Carpathian Brigade, they join the New Zealanders, providing some progress, as the 5th Indian Brigade likewise makes a little progress at El Hamza. You're going to say something?
No, I was just saying, 15 tanks is already like at their pre-Operation Compass battle strength, like 3% of their tank force. So
yeah,
you factor in their losses that they would have taken so far in this campaign, in this operation, this is a much higher percentage of tanks.
Yeah, I mean, it's like
Plus, I'm pretty sure, like a lot of the Italian tanks and tankettes are probably out by now, because
a lot of them are abandoned.
Tank.
A lot of the L3s, they just get abandoned because they can't afford to even fuel these things. They're honestly, they're very useless. It's comical. On the 15th, the 17th Pavia, 27th Brescia, and the 102nd Trento divisions, they hold back the New Zealand Polish attacks, freeing the 15th Panzers and the 132nd Arate divisions and the 8th Bersaglieri and 115th Loy Regiment against point 204. The Axis forces, they overrun the Allies, killing maybe 1,000 men, capturing 71, but it's too late to organize a proper assault against the forces at El Hamza. Meanwhile, the 4th Armored Brigade, they hook from the south, attacking Bir Halig El Eliba, cutting the Africa Corps' line of communication. With the Africa Corps now down to their last 8 operational tanks, it's come this far, and the 132nd Arate Division's down to 30 of their Italian tanks. Rommel, he fears that the 7th Armored Division southern advance is basically just going to end things for him, so he has to evacuate the Gazella line that very night. So what was looking like a unbelievable, unmitigated disaster, Operation Crusader. And I mean, from Rommel's eyes, this must have been a bitter pill to watch, as you just destroyed more than, I think, 70% of the Allied armor, served them such unbelievable defeats, inflicted a lot of casualties. And then your logistics just fail you and you have to run. That's basically how this went down.
Yeah, but I think, see, I'm gonna put like the logistics situation for the Axis. It really will have to be the blame. I'm gonna put like some part on goes on Rommel and some part goes on the Axis High Command.
Oh, absolutely.
First of all, Barbarossa is going to be taking up huge amounts of resources, and most of the tanks, aircraft that are um, coming out will be going to them, to the Eastern Front. The Italians, okay, that just doesn't count. They just don't have anything to give.
No,
I mean,
they
the
really
only
don't.
thing good is just supplies at the most, but in terms of equipment, zero.
And let's not
And
forget, the Germans are not supposed to be in North Africa. Operation
no, they're not.
Barbarossa, it should have been a lot. There should have been a lot more effort there, and there's a
And
colossal amount of resources being sent to North Africa that could have been used for the March of Moscow.
yeah, but at the same time, we also have to consider the fact neither the Germans or the Italians really got towards the concept of mass production because they had so many different tanks, so many different aircraft, different parts. There's no coordination, which is completely unlike what the British have been doing. They've standardized everything, and that's also why, like you will see, like it's close cooperation between the British and Americans later on.
Yep.
That this is why, like your Liberty ships were so successful, or the Shermans, or the Mustangs, right? How they could keep producing so many aircraft.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm not mistaken, like the Spitfire and the P-51, for example, would be using the same engine, right?
Yeah, because I'll leave Italy out of this because I'm sorry to say they're kind of insignificant in this regard. Germany doesn't even abide by a full wartime economy until like
I think after
late 40.
Stalingrad, if I'm,
Yeah,
I think
it's
it's after Stalingrad they start preparing for a total war.
and again, there's a lot of factors as to why this happened. Some of it has to do with just the way they produce some other things, like their aircraft and tanks. Again, I keep saying it. There's the Ford assembly line way of thinking, like the American way, where there's a bunch of guys just putting these parts together for the same tank. Whereas the Germans, it's more of a craftsmanship, where it's kind of like a team or an individual who's building one start to finish. It's a very slow, makes a fantastic vehicle, very slow, impractical. And until Albert Speer, who's always bothered me, an architect is brought in to kind of revamp the entire economy. And when he looks at things, what he finds out as problematic is German factories aren't even working together. They're even found to be screwing each other over, stealing, not providing steel to one place, taking contracts from another one. Until Albert Speer kind of clears this up and actually
He did a fairly commendable job. I'll give him that,
yeah,
because
but
like
we're grading him on a real low grade. That's the thing.
yeah, but okay, to be fair, he can only do with the hand he's been dealt with. Because if I
Exactly.
remember
Yeah.
something like this is an example, I think like heavy machine guns in Germany, right? Like your MG-42 equivalents. Prior to Speer taking over production, I
Yeah.
think it would take 2 months for just one gun to be ready or something like that. He slashes the time because he just removes a lot of the unnecessary steps in the production to try to streamline it.
Yep.
Which is what they should have done in the first place. But
if you look
and
at Germany World War One, they have a real full wartime economy going. Whereas World War II, Hitler didn't want the population of Germany to actually feel the brunt of what was going on. So yeah.
Well, I mean, they already were feeling with the rationing and everything. So
Yes.
same.
Yeah.
But
Very, very
I'll also
foolish.
say Rommel is also someone that should take a little bit of blame because he was very aggressive by nature, which while it can be a good, and as I'll say it, right, like in 1942 when he goes up against Neil Richie and Auchinleck, those guys are very indecisive in comparison to Rommel, in
Yeah,
deciding
it's
what to
true.
do. And this is why, Rommel was again, able to advance towards El Alamein, right? Like that that depth of penetration was because of his aggression and decisiveness. But he just overran the supplies of a supply base, right? Like the Axis supplies just could never sustain. And as we'll see in 1942, like with way more British and American resources pouring in to the theater,
Oh yeah.
it's it's just not going to be a pretty picture for the Germans.
And back to Rommel. I mean, after everything's said and done, he did avoid getting cut off, so he didn't lose his entire army or anything like that. But it snatched what was a decisive victory from Auchinleck. The Axis, they're now taking up a position at El Hasaiya and Ajdabiya, and the Axis threat to Egypt has been lifted for now. The Axis had suffered almost 40,000 casualties. Nearly 350 tanks were damaged or destroyed, and 330 aircraft were lost. The loss of aircraft is very significant in the North African campaign. The isolated Italian and German garrisons left behind, they're forced to surrender because they don't have the vehicles to get away,
Supplies.
nor the fuel to run them or the water. They have to just sit where they are and actually hope to be captured or they might die. In a lot of the cases, the Allies, they suffered nearly 20,000 casualties during this, and 800 tanks were either damaged or destroyed, with 300 aircraft lost. Auchinleck had taken another 33,000 prisoners, and he cleared Rommel out of Cyrenaica, but Churchill would blame him for what he sees as an incomplete counterstroke. So Churchill was, again, very, very angry that they didn't capture a significant portion of the Axis forces. It seems like the Axis always gets away from them. Mind you, with the way that
I'm
they...
pretty sure right now the thing is, by him withdrawing from Cyrenaica, so that is like I think he's halfway down Libya now, right?
Yeah.
Like away from Egypt, right? Closer to Tripoli.
Mhm.
This is what Rommel needs because now he doesn't have to lose that much supplies in trucking and building up his frontline forces again.
Yeah,
Whereas
exactly.
we know this at the current state, this is also where the limit of the Allied supply lines.
Yeah, it's not a one-way street. Either which side, whoever is on the offensive and pushing one way across Africa, you're going to suffer from the supply issue. Although the one thing that the British have going for them is most of the time they can rely on the Royal Navy making some runs to certain ports, like even the smaller ports, mind you, like Tobruk. Well, it's not that small, but it's smaller than some of the other ones, can supply them there. So the Allies have a little bit of an easier time when it comes to logistics, but both
Yeah,
sides have
but
to use the same road.
yeah, but at the same time we'll see, in 1942 with Malta getting that battering that it will get now that Fliegerkorps 10 is giving its full undivided attention. You
Yeah.
can see how difficult and risky it would even be for Allied ships, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
I guess so, it's still the supply war that is going to win this campaign.
It's a war of attrition logistically. And
Yeah.
unfortunately for the Axis, when you're looking at this, the North African campaign is a front that Germany should not have had to deal with.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for them. And it took away from other fronts, like very noticeably Operation Barbarossa. And it's like dominoes. Each time they're diverting some of their limited resources, it just overall hurts them. Whereas every single day that goes by, the Allies only get stronger in World War II. And
Yeah,
very
because
much so with America.
they have they have men and material, both. And as you said, they have fuel. Like Britain literally is feeding the entire North African campaign from the Persian oil fields that it now controls properly. Like there's
Yeah.
no threat to it whatsoever.
And it's only going to get worse for the Axis as America will soon be in World War II, and
Well,
it'll
I mean,
take
at
them
the
a while.
time, well, if I'm not mistaken, by the end of Operation Crusader, the Americans are technically
Yes,
in the
but I
war
mean,
now.
but
Yeah.
it's going to take them a while to be able to actually do anything.
No,
I mean, they're going to make
true,
supply
but
runs. They'll make supply runs very early. Yes.
yeah, I know they won't get here till like Torch, granted, but officially now, we should just say like America is now in the war because we are reaching the turn towards 1942 now.
And things are really going to turn up. And Operation Torch is so much more confusing than I had ever believed. I had to not too long ago write an episode for Kings and Generals on Operation Torch that can be found on their Patreon if people are interested. And I had to read 3 books just to understand micro landings, because if you've watched an episode on YouTube, it doesn't do it justice. There is so much going on in Torch. It's really incredible, and it has to do with not just military affairs. There's actually a lot of politics going on because
Or like the
technically
French.
they want to win the
The-
French over as they're invading, but then the Germans are doing the same. It's very complicated, and a lot of French commanders are very flip-floppy, and it's kind of comical. I can't get into it here, but yeah.
I know who you're talking about.
Well, there's numbers of French commanders to be mentioned, but I have to say,
Yeah, that's
being
for next time. That's for
yeah,
next time.
being from Quebec, I have a personal hatred for Mr. de Gaulle a little bit there, and he's part of it, that's for sure. There's actually worse French commanders than him who do a lot more to hurt the Allied war effort, but anyways, he has a special place in my heart. I just realized this is the 5th episode we've done, and again, I haven't shouted out my Patreon at the beginning of the episode. So unfortunately, I'm going to do it again here. So guys, if you'd like to support my channel or this podcast series, I have a Patreon account that can be found at www.patreon.com/the Pacific War Channel. It's as low as $2 a month. Everyone gets access to the exclusive Patreon podcast. I put one out every month. I put up a poll to ask people what they want to hear about, and I completely leave it up to suggestions. So one guy had actually put out a suggestion on the last poll. So then next month, I'll probably be doing an episode on exactly what he was talking about. I try to just please the audience, and it doesn't have to be about the Pacific War. I'm covering all sorts of things. This month's episode, which I'm currently writing, is a colossal nightmare, and I wish I never put it as an option because people picked it. It's an alternate history episode on what if the Japanese attacked the Soviet Union instead of performing the what we call the Nanshinran strategy, which was the southern strike strategy to southern thrust to attack the Dutch East Indies predominantly to get their resources there, and Britain's Malaya and Pearl Harbor and everything else. There's a good reason it never happened. The plans the Japanese had to attack the Soviet Union are, I can't put it any other way, they're stupid. Their objectives are not
That's
even
blunt.
their objectives are minuscule. They were going to seize very useless locations. They knew they were useless. The only rationale for doing it was to help the Germans win the Battle of Moscow, and the Japanese take months to officiate a plan, and the Battle of Moscow is finished by the time they actually decide if they were going to help. It's such a stupid episode, and I feel like I'm going to really anger a lot of people who want to hear like some kind of Hearts of Iron 4 situation where the Japanese travel 6,000 kilometers through a frozen wasteland to maybe link up with the Germans or some crazy shit. I have no idea. It's impossible.
Okay.
Thank God Japan never did it.
Logistics.
If people want to know the short answer, if Japan attacked the Soviet Union in World War II, not only would Moscow not fall, Japan would be taken over by the Soviet Union. I guarantee it. It might happen, not in 45, might be 47, but it's going to happen.
Well, I mean, let's not even forget that, if I'm not mistaken, at that time, Stalin put the best Red Army forces on that frontier at that time, just around the time of Barbarossa.
One thing I couldn't believe, and I wasn't even, this caught me by surprise. I'll just, one last thing to tell the audience. The very famous saying that the Siberian Corps came over and then they performed this incredible thrust against, the Germans who were performing Operation Typhoon, the thrust against Moscow. So this famous Siberian Corps that comes and just destroys the Germans. There's no indication that any of them were Siberian Corps units. You look, there's a guy who I have to hand it to him. He made an entire website looking into all the divisions that come over from the Soviet Far East to fight at the Battle of Moscow. And if you look where the units go, there is a few units that you could consider these like amazing Siberian Corps units, but for the most part, they're not. So it's almost as if there might be kind of like a myth of like how much this had to do with the Great Counteroffensive. And anyways, in the episode, I put out a few scenarios. One involving what I think Stalin would do is just sacrifice the Far East, because who gives a shit about Vladivostok? Like, why would he sacrifice Moscow for that? The second scenario is, what if he took half the units, brought them over to protect Moscow? And then the third one is like, he just keeps the units there, and perhaps it gives the Germans like a bit of a chance to do more damage, but ultimately it doesn't change much in the greater scheme of things. And the Japanese would have about 4 months of oil to traverse 6,000 kilometers if they want to do anything, because there was nothing, absolutely nothing in the Far East that would have aided the Japanese. It would have.
Can I just say snow? Can I just say snow?
Oh, they could have cut some trees down. And I know there's people who think, oh, but there's these unbelievable swaths of oil in Siberia, and the Japanese need oil. There's oil in Libya, and the Italians didn't know it in World War II. The Japanese are not going to be able to find the oil in Siberia. They're not going to be able to use it, because how would they even have the know-how?
Because it's exactly like why they wanted the Dutch East Indies, because, hey, the refineries actually exist. We could just repair it.
And the refineries come with the people who operate them. Even better.
Package deal.
Yeah, exactly. In Siberia, the Japanese could not exploit the oil there. That's the most ridiculous thing that people come up with. And then there's people who talk about the biological weapons that Unit 731 had. This is late 1941. Unit 731, it takes them months upon months to cultivate like an actual biological weapon. They didn't have them at the time. They didn't have anything in large enough quantity. They used them. They definitely did use them during the border skirmishes, and the Russians used biological weapons on the Japanese. People don't talk about that. So, yeah, if the Japanese wanted to open up the floodgates on that, I don't think it would go too well for them. I think the Russians would probably throw the same stuff at them. I'll leave that there. Gaurav, thank you again for being here for this almost 2 hour long podcast at this point. It's been a fun one. And everybody, we're going to be back here with part 6. This is going to go for a long time, but we have been talking together, and we're going to probably put out a Pacific War episode very soon. For you guys who are getting probably a little like, what's going on? This is the Pacific War channel. We're going to put out some Pacific War content very soon.
Oh, definitely. I think it'll just be a good change also for us.
Definitely. All right. This has been the Pacific War channel. Over and out.